Our loving God in heaven, we thank you for this
Mwari wedu
Sabbath
anotida
day.
kudenga.
We thank you that we can join
Tinokutendai
together
nezuva reSabata.
for the information
Tikutendai nekuti tinogona
that
kujoina pamwe
makes
chete
some
neinformation
sense of the confusion and tumult that is in the world
inomeka
at the
sense
moment.
kuconfusion
We don't want to
netumult
add
iri
to that confusion,
munyika.
Lord, so we ask that you would guide
Hatidi
our discussion
kuwedzera
and our thoughts and
paconfusion
our
iyi Mwari.
studies,
Saka
and we
tinokumbira kuti
pray for your
mutitungamirire
presence. We think of
mumadiscussion edu
all
nepfungwa
the
dzedu.
members right across Oceania today and ask for a
Tinofunga
blessing for them
mamembers
as
vese
well.
variko Oceania
And
nhasi
so do not
tichikumbira
leave us this
blessing
morning, Lord,
kwavari.
until you bless us. Is
Musatisiya
our prayer
nhasi
in
Mwari
Jesus' name.
kusvikira
Amen.
matikomborera. Ndo munamato wedu muzita raJesu. Amen.
So good morning. I've noticed a few more people come on, so I'll just repeat what I've said earlier,
Mangwanani
is that
akanaka.
I just want to
Ndaona
do a
vanhu
small
vakati wandei
review
vauya.
of what I shared
Ndongoita review
in
ipfupi
Fiji, March, April, that was recorded a
yezvinhu
couple of weeks ago, and it's been
zvandakashare
on our YouTube
muFiji
channel.
March April
If you're not
zvakarekodwa
subscribed to our YouTube
mawiki
channel, you
apfuura
need to be. In
zvaapa
fact,
YouTube channel yedu.
maybe
Kana
after
musina
this we could talk about all
kusubscribe
the ministry channels
pachannel
that you
yedu,
should be subscribed to
subscribe
and press the notification button.
maministry
So if
channels
you
bese
haven't
amunofana
heard those first two
kusubscribe
studies,
moisa
then I'm
notification
asking
button.
you to remain
Kana
silent for
musati manzwa
this
mastudy
particular
maviri
study because
maya
it might not make sense,
ndoti
and I can
mumbonyarara
explain things
kuti
afterwards, or you
dzidzei
can
ichi
go ahead
nokuti
and
chinogona
watch the studies,
kusameka sense.
hopefully.
Ndogona kuzokutsanangurai zvinhu
So
tapedza kana kunogona kuzonoona
beware the person
mega.
that preempts their study by saying this will be a short one, because they never are. But I think this will be a short one.
Munhu anotanga angotaura kuti
that was the
chidzidzo
plan.
chinenge chiri chipfupi nekuti kazhinji zvinoreba.
So
Asi ndofuna
the
kuti inenge
discussion
iri
is
pfupi
on
nekuti ndoya
Sunday
iri
law,
plan.
and the study began with a
Nhaurirano
review of
iri
Acts
pamusoro
27
peSunday
and the
law.
two ships,
Chidzidzo chakatanga
the
nekudzokorera
parables of the
Acts
two
27
ships
nezvikepe
that give
zviviri,
us the two lines,
maparable
one starting in
ezvikepe zviviri
1798 and the
zvinotipa
other in
maline maviri. Imwe
1989.
inotanga
Our two
1798,
times of the
imwe
end,
1989.
our things
Matime of
old
the
and
end
things
maviri,
new from Matthew
zvinhu
chapter 13, that
zvitsva
all
nezvinhu
good
zvekare
scribes that
kubva kuna
are
Matthew 13.
diligent in the things of the
Kuti
kingdom of heaven
magood
must
scribes
know.
vese
So
vari diligent
we
kuzvinhu zveMwari
reviewed those
vanofanira kuziva
lines,
maparable
and in
aya.
particular we were
Saka
looking at Sunday
takadzokorodza
law,
maline
so we
aya
came down to
kunyanya-nyanya
the end of our
taitarisa
lines,
Sunday law. Saka
and we
takatarisa
want to note
magumo
the
emaline
time
edu.
period between the midnight
Taida
cry and
kuona
Sunday
kuti
law,
nguva iri pakati peMidnight
which is
Cry
shipwreck.
neSunday law
And we know that that is the
inova
overturning
shipwreck.
of
Tinoziva kuti ndokupidigudzwa
the United States, the institutions of the United
kweUnited
States.
States, ma-institutions ekuUnited States.
And I've just brought this portion of the second line, made it larger.
Yeline rechipiri ndikaiita kuti iti kurei.
We note that the Battle of Beneventum
Tinoona kuti
occurred in 275 BC. So back up.
rakaitika 275
So in
BC.
Acts 27, Acts 27:27 gives us the midnight
27.
cry. It's the
Acts
doubling.
27:27
It's when they can
inotipa
see
midnight
shipwreck
cry,
ahead.
doubling.
Acts
Ndopavanotanga kuona
27:37,
shipwreck
we're
yako
told
yakumberi.
that there are
Acts
276
27:37
people on
pane
board
vanhu
that boat. When we take
276
away
vanga vari
Aristarchus,
pabhoti.
Luke, and Paul, we're left
Patinobvisa
with
Aristarchus,
273, and that
Luke
gives us the
naPaul
two
tinosarwa
groups. One group
ne273
being the
votipa
Levite,
maboka
the other
maviri.
group, the three,
Rimwe boka
being the priests.
riri
So we
maLevites,
273
rimwe
BC.
boka
So we
ari
use that number
mapriests. Saka
273
tina
as a
273
symbol
BC.
of the
Tinoshandisa
Levites,
namba
but we
273 sesymbol
also
yemaLevites.
went back in history
Asi
and looked at
zvakare
273
takadzokera
BC
kunhoroondo
and saw
tikatarisa
that there was a
273
very
BC. Tikaona kuti
important event that happened in that year.
papaine chiitiko
So
chiri
let's enlarge it
important chakaitika
here.
mugore iroro.
273
Saka
BC
ngatizviwedzerei pana
is when Egypt
273
sent its
BC.
delegation or
Ndipo apo
ambassadors
Egypt
to Rome. And
yakatumira
why did they do that?
delegation kana
Because
maambassador
Rome had
kuRome.
defeated
Vakazviitira izvi
Pyrrhus in
nekuda kwokuti Rome
275
yanga
BC.
yakurira
Rome had
Pyrrhus
arrived on the world
na275
stage.
BC.
The world was
Rome
taking notice,
yanga yasvika
and
paworld
Egypt
stage.
sent ambassadors
Nyika yakanga
to
ichitora
Rome
notice.
to
Egypt
forge
yakatumira maambassadors
alliances and
kuRome
friendships with the
kugadzira
rising
maalliance
power.
nemafriendship nesimba
So we mark
raisumuka.
275
Saka
minus
tinomaka
275 as 2021, the Battle
minus
of
275
Beneventum,
sa2021
minus
Battle yeBeneventum.
273 as
Minus
June 24,
273
2022,
chimaka
which is
June
the Dobbs
24,
versus Jackson's
2022.
Women's Health
Inova
Organization, the
Dobbs
Supreme
versus
Court case
Jackson's
that
Women's Health
overturned Roe versus
Organization.
Wade.
Supreme Court case
In my first study, I had
yakapindukira Roe
July
versus
written.
Wade.
That was a
Muchidzidzo changu
boo-boo.
chekutanga
So
ndakanyora July.
it's June, and thank you for all the people that
saka ndijune
told me that.
ndakanga
So
ndakanganisa
it's
makaita
June
basa vanhu
24,
vakandiudza
not July
izvozvo
24.
saka iJune 24 kwete
And so
July
the study
24
went on to show that
saka chidzidzo
272
chakaenderera mberi kuratidza kuti
BC,
272
where Rome sent a
BC,
delegation to Egypt,
apo Rome
where we also
yakasenda
note that
delegation
the Battle of
kuEgypt.
Tarentum, Tarentum
Patinoonawo zvakare
falls,
kuti battle
and we have the Battle of
kana kuti
Argos, and
panodonha
Pyrrhus
Tarentum
dies. But it's
tinei tine
also when
battle
Rome
yeArgos,
sends
Pyrrhus
ambassadors
ofa.
back to Egypt, and
Ndipo
it's
zvakare
headed
Rome
by
inotumira
Quintus
maambassadors
Fabius
kuEgypt
Maximus Gurgis.
ichitungamirirwa naQuintus Fabius
And
Maximus
spoiler
Gurgis.
alert for those that haven't watched the first two
Ndosana
presentations,
kukudzai
we're
hangu
marking that as
vasati vaona
2024,
mapresentation
this
ekutanga
year,
tiri
shipwreck
kumaka izvi
Sunday law.
sa2024
The
gore
reason
rino
we did that is we
shipwreck
went back
Sunday
to the
law.
name of Quintus
Maka
Fabius
takaita izvi
Maximus
ndeyekuti
Gurgis.
takadzokera kuzita raQuintus
And we noted
Fabius
in
Maximus
Roman
Gurgis.
nomenclature, so this is how they
Takanota kuRome nomenclature
build their names, that Quintus
ndo
is his
kubuilda
prenomen.
kwavaita mazita avo kuti
So
Quintus
with Roman
ndiyo
names, you had a
prenomen.
prenomen, which is your personal
Nemazita
name, your
ekuRome
given name.
waiva neprenomen yaiva personal name
And his
yawaipiwa.
name was Quintus, and you were called Quintus if you were the fifth
Zita rake
son,
rainzi
or you
Quintus,
were born
wainzi
in the
Quintus
fifth
kana uri
month.
mwana wechishanu kana kuti kana
Two reasons
wakazvarwa
to being called
mwedzi
Quintus.
wechishanu.
Fabius
Mhaka
is
mbiri
his nomen,
dzekudayidzwa kunzi
which to
Quintus.
the Romans was your most
Fabius ndo
important
raiva
name.
nomen.
It's the name that
KumaRomans ndo
identified
yaiva
which
zita rakakosha zvikuru.
gens
Izita
or tribe you
raiidentifya
belong
kuti
to.
unobva
It's what
kugenes
gave you
dzipi
your
kana
authority
tribe
in
ipi, dzinza
society.
rako
If you had
nderipi,
belonged to a
ndo
strong
zvaikupa
and
simba
important, powerful
musociety. Kana waibva
gens tribe,
kune
then it could
dzinza
take you a long
rakasimba
way.
riri
Like
rakakosha
Julius Caesar, he was born poor, but it didn't matter because he's from the Julii tribe, so he could climb that ladder.
akazvarwa ari poor asi asina basa nekuti
And we
aiva
noticed
weJuly
that Fabius means
Saka
father
akakwira
beans. They were
ladder.
bean
Fabius
farmers,
takataura kuti
and
noreva fafa
we
beans.
showed that
Mafarmers
fava beans were
takataura
used
kuti
for
fava
elections or
beans
voting. We call them broad beans or
dzaishandiswawo
fava beans. They're known as a
kumaelection
couple
kana
of names.
kukuvhota. Broad beans kana
If you've
fava
heard
beans
the expression,
dzinozivikanwa nemazita
spill the
akasiyana
beans.
siyana. Kana
So
makanzwa
today
expression
we say
yekunzi
spill the
spill
beans,
the
we're
beans.
asking somebody to
Nhasi
divulge
tinoti
secret
spill the beans.
information. That's how
Kana
we use it today.
uchitaura kune
It's
munhu
like
kuti
somebody knows something you
tipeka
don't. So
information.
spill the beans. Come on, tell us
Kana
what you
munhu
know.
achiziva zvinhu zvausingazivi
But
kuti
its
spill the beans
origins,
kuti
it's
tiudzeka
got Greek
zvaukuziva.
origins, and it meant that
Asi
you were
mavambo
carrying the
ayo
urn that
anobva
contained
kuGreece.
all the
Zvoreva
beans,
kuti iwe
the
ndiwe
light-coloured
wakatakura
beans that were yes votes
chitini
and
chinenge
the
chine
black-coloured
mabeans aya.
beans that were no votes. And if
Ane
you spilt
white
the
colour
beans, if
yekuti
you
yes,
dropped the urn,
eblack anenge aine
then the
yepingo.
information was
Kana
disclosed
wakambonedza manje chitini ichi, information
pretty
yaibva yazivikanwa.
too early. So you were getting the information
Nguva isati
before
yasvika.
you were meant
Saka
to. So it's
waizowana
actually an election
information
result.
usati
So
wafana
spilling the
kuziva
beans is
information.
getting the
Saka
election
iresult
result.
re-election. Saka kunzi spill
And
the
then
beans.
Maximus Gurgis
Kuburitsa
is
ma-election
this
results
man's
nguva isati
cognomen,
yasvika.
which is like a
Maximum
nickname. It's a
judges
descriptive
ndo
name. And you can get a cognomen
ramunhu uyu
from
inova nickname kana
just
descriptive
as
name.
a nickname,
Unowana cognomen
or it can show which
nickname
family
kana
you're
kuti
from in
unogona
that particular
kuratidza
tribe.
kuti unobva
So it
kumhuri
can be given
ipi
for a couple of reasons.
tribe iyoyo.
So he was
Saka
called
inogona
Maximus
kupuwa
Gurgis
kumareasons
because in his
akawanda.
youth
Saka ainzi
he was
maximum
quite
Gurgis
excessive.
nekuti
Not
muyouth
exactly
yake
sure what that meant, but I
aiva
don't know, drinking, partying,
excessive.
carrying on.
Handinyaziva
He was
zvoreve
called
handiti
Maximus
aimwa
Gurgis.
here aita mapati.
So
Asi
that's how
aingonzi
his
maximum
name went.
Gurgis.
So we
Saka
identified that
ndo
Sunday law is
famba
connected
kukaita
with
zita rake.
elections and voting.
Takaidentify kuti Sunday law
And so we went
yakabatana
through the
nemaelection
history of
nekuvhota.
voting
Saka
rights,
takapinda munhoroondo
particularly in
nemavoting
the
rights
United States, because
nyanye
we
kuAmerica
want to know
nekuti
the truth of the fourth
taida
beast,
kuziva
which is
kuti
Rome,
chokwadi
which
chefourth
identifies
beast
the United
ndechipi
States at
inova
the end of the
Rome
world. It is the glorious land.
inoidentifya
There are
United States
half the
kwekupedzisira
world
kuti ndiyo
is
glorious
voting this
land.
year, and
Hafu
but the
yenyika
glorious
iri
land is
kuvhota
the
gore rino.
one country that
Asi
everybody
glorious
is
land
focused on.
ndiyo nyika imwe chete iyo munhu
So,
wese akatarisana nayo.
but first of all, just a couple of things on Maximus flood.
Chekutanga zvinhu zvishoma kuna
I came across an
neMaximus
article
flood.
from the Royal Society of
Ndakasangana
Victoria,
nearticle kubva kuRoyal Society yeVictoria.
and I'll just share this.
Ndichangoshare izvi.
So the Royal Society of Victoria is,
saka Royal Society yeVictoria
it convenes the Victoria's science community.
inosangana
Membership is open to anyone
Victoria
interested
Science
in science
Community.
and its history.
Membership
And this is its
inovhurirwa
April
munhu wese anoda
2024
zvesainzi
edition.
nezvehistory.
And I
April
will just read the
2024
first two paragraphs.
edition
It's on the rise of
tichangoverenga
misinformation and
maparagraph 2 ekutanga.
disinformation. In this edition, we're looking at
Inotaura
4
nezvekusumuka
crises currently
kwemisinformation
faced by our planet.
nedisinformation.
For 3 of these, it's relatively easy to see the
ari
threat.
kutarisana nenyika.
Declining biodiversity
Matatu ayo
is
ari nyore
threatening the
kuona.
existence of species. Air, water, and soil
Decline
pollution are
kwebiodiversity
impacting the health
threatening
of every living
maspecies.
thing. And
Mhepo,
climate
mvura
change is
nemavhu
increasingly throwing
zviri
the Earth's
kuimpacta
systems
health
into
yezvinhu
chaos.
zvese zvinorarama.
They really
Climate
feel
change
like the
iri
horsemen
kuwedzera
of an apocalypse. So he's noted the 3 things there: declining biodiversity, pollution, and
zvinoratidzwa
climate change.
semahorsemen
The
eapocalypse.
4th of these
Saka,
crises, the rise
zvinzvataurwa
of
izvi,
misinformation, might sound
biodiversity
less
iri kudzidzira,
catastrophic than its
population
counterparts,
neclimate
but
change.
it is arguably the
chinoonekwa
horsemen who
kunge
preceded the others.
misinformation. Asi ndicho
Understanding,
horsemen
curbing, and
chakatanga kubva
countering misinformation is
vamwe
vital if we
kunzwisisa
stand any hope of meaningfully
nekugadzirisa
addressing these
misinformation
planetary
kwakakosha.
crises.
Kana
What is
paine hope
misinformation?
yekuadresa zvinhu
What problems
izvi
does it cause?
secrisis.
And most importantly, what can we do
Misinformation
about
chi
it?
inokonzeresa
I
madambudziko
liked
api.
their
Chakakosha toita
explanation
sei
here,
nayo.
their definition.
Takafarira tsananguro iri
Information
panapa
informs an
nedefinition
audience
dzavo.
about something. It is
Information
data that
inoudza
has been
vanhu
processed
nezvechimwe chinhu.
and given
Idata
context
rinenge
so that it
raprocesswa
conveys meaning.
ropiwa context
The numbers 12,
kuti
18,
igove
and 90 are
nezvainoreva.
seemingly random data. But
Manamba
with the
12,
context
18
of 12
na 19
goals,
anongoita
18
kunge random
behinds,
data.
90 points,
Asi
those numbers
tikaudzwa
inform
kunzi
the
12
audience
goals,
of Collingwood's
18
winning
behinds,
score in
90
the
points.
2023
Manamba
AFL Grand Final.
anotiudza
Obviously, know
nekuhwina
who this person follows.
kwemagoo akaskovewa
The
mugrand final
difference between
ya2023
misinformation and disinformation is intent.
difference pakati
Both
pemisinformation
refer to false,
nedisinformation
inaccurate, or
iri
misleading
intent.
information.
Maviri
Misinformation is
anorefera
shared
ku
without the
false,
intent to
inaccurate,
deceive,
misleading
while
information.
disinformation is created and
Misinformation
shared with
inopiwa
the
usina
intention of
intention
deliberately
yekudeceive.
deceiving or misleading
Disinformation
others.
inopiwa
If
kana kugadzirwa
misinformation
vaine
is like
intention
manslaughter,
yekumislida
then
vanhu. Kana
disinformation is like
misinformation
murder.
ichiita
Either
kunge
way,
kuuraya
the
vanhu,
information is dead.
disinformation inoita kunge murder.
Then they'll go on to give a bit of
Either
a
way,
history of
information inenge yayo.
misinformation and disinformation, and give an
Tobva
example
tapawo
of
nhoroondo
the
yemisinformation
sugar industry, which
nedisinformation.
is kind of
Topa
very
muenzaniso
interesting.
wesugar industry
But down here,
inova iri
they
interesting. Asi
list,
pazasi apa
explain the reasons why we've seen a
vanolista
rise in it now.
mareasons.
With a long
Maakaseti
history of
chiona
misinformation
chikwira
and
izvozvo.
disinformation, why
Nenhoroondo
has it now
yakawanda
increased to the
yemisinformation
level of a planetary
disinformation sei
crisis?
yawedzera kumalevel
The University of
eplanetary
Melbourne's
crisis.
Professor Andrew
University
Pefors
yemelbourne
puts it down to
Professor
2
Andrew
fundamental
Pefors
reasons: the
vanoizvinyora
advent of the internet
two
and our
mafundamental reasons.
difficulties in determining
Kuuya
which
kwakaita
information we
internet
should believe. Put simply,
nekuomerwa
it
kwekuziva
comes
kuti
down to
totenda
technology
information ipi.
and
Zvichitaurwa
psychology.
zviri nyore zvinoti
The internet and social
zvinongouya
media have
kutechnology
rapidly
nepsychology.
accelerated the spread
Internet
and
nesocial
escalated
media
the risks posed by
zvakaaccelerata
misinformation.
zvikaspreada
Once
zvikaaccelerata
restricted to
marisks
legacy
anoudzwa
media formats,
nemisinformation.
incorrect information is now
Zvakarestrictwa
able to quickly and
legacy
repeatedly
media
reach its
formats.
audience and
Information
disrupt
isiriyo
societies, as we witnessed during the COVID-19
yakuwedzera
pandemic.
kudisrupta society.
Facebook, Twitter, TikTok,
sezvakaitika
YouTube, Instagram,
muCovid-19
LinkedIn, Google
pandemic.
Search and Google News,
Facebook, Twitter,
Snapchat and
TikTok,
Apple
YouTube,
News are
Instagram
key digital
nezvimwe
platforms
zvataurwa.
for news and information
Makey
for
digital
many
platforms
Australians,
kunews
as detailed by the
neinformation
Australian
kuvanhu
Communications
vekuaustralia
and Media
vakawanda.
Authority in their
Sezvakataurwa
2020
neAustralian
position paper on
Communications Media
addressing
Authority
misinformation.
mu2020 position
As
paper yavo
unregulated as they
yavaiadresa
can seem,
information.
these platforms have at least
Sekusaregulatwa
some
kwazvo
ability
zvinogona
to
kunge
flag
zviripo. Maplatform
inaccurate,
aya
misleading,
ane
or
ability
inappropriate content.
yekuflaga
In
inaccurate,
contrast,
misleading kana
content shared on
inappropriate
encrypted
content.
message platforms like
Contrast
WhatsApp and
content
Telegram
inenge
is
yasheiwa
significantly
pamaencrypted
harder
messages platform
to
akaita
address.
kunge WhatsApp kana Telegram zvinowedzera kuoma kuadresa.
So it'll then go on and talk some more about that. But what I wanted to point out there that I've got from this article, but I'm seeing it elsewhere as
chandakawana
well,
kuarticle
is the
iri
problem
asi
of WhatsApp.
ndakazviona kune dzimwe nzvimbo
And
zvakare
we know that it's a
dambudziko
blessing, but that it can
rewhatsapp
also be a curse.
tinoziva
And if
kuti
I say, talk to you
chikomborero asi
about the,
chinogona kuve
is it the
curse.
Wakely riots? Am I pronouncing that right? Yes, the Wakely
ndikataura
riots in Sydney
nezvemariots
earlier this year
eWatley
in
ekusydney
April. If you
akaitika
remember the Wakely
eli gore
riots,
rino muna
there was a
april
young
kana muchirangarira maWatley riots
extremist
kwakanga
who
kuine
entered a
muextremist
church
anga ari
while they were live streaming and stabbed the
akapinda
priest
mukereke
on live stream.
yavaita live stream
So that
akabaya
within
priest
half an
palive
hour,
stream
there were 2,000 people
half an
descended on
hour
that
yapfuura
church.
papatova
And
nevanhu 2000
the
vanga
information
vatosvika
got
pachechi
around
iyoyo information
quicker than it did
yakasvika
any of the
kuvanhu
news sources through these
nekukasira
WhatsApp groups.
than
Some of the
zvayakaita
WhatsApp
kumanews
groups were
sources kubudikidza
800 people plus,
nemawhatsapp group aya
but there were a number
mawhatsapp
of
group aya
them.
aitova nevanhu vapfuura
And
ma800 paiva nevanhu
some people on these
vakawanda
groups were calling for calm, but there was enough
vamwe
people sharing
pamagroup aya
misinformation and
vaiti
disinformation on that group
vaida
that
kukawo
created a riot.
masituation asi
And
pane
so WhatsApp has
misinformation
come to the
nedisinformation
attention
yakashewa
of a lot of people across
pamagroups
the
iwayo
world as one
zvakazouya
of the
kuattention yevanhu vakawanda
worst sorts
pasi
of
tenderere
distributors of misinformation. So I
sechinhu
think that's
chiri
something that
wese
we need to be aware of as a movement
chekudistributa
because we
misinformation ndiyo whatsapp
rely on
saka
it so
tofanira kunge
much.
tiri
It
aware
does have its down
nekuti tinorilaya nayo
pitfalls.
zvakanyanya iyo
So I just
whatsapp
wanted to
ine
say that
madownfalls
on
ayo
the
saka ndinoda kungozvitaura izvi
on Maximus Gurgis.
panyaya yamaximus Gurgis.
Yeah, if you Google that, there's a really good Guardian article, and it talks about how the information spread on WhatsApp, and they interviewed people, and they said they were getting the same videos, the same photos, but with different commentary and different explanations. So you really didn't know what to believe. But it was really a problem. Okay, so that's Maximus Gurgis. So the fava beans. Actually, we might just, before we go to voting, just want to touch again on Quintus. So we noted that Quintus, you were called Quintus if you were the fifth son or born on the fifth month. So we looked at, whoops, the Roman calendar and the Julian calendar. And noted in the Roman calendar, there were only 10 months. It was a lunar calendar, and they had no accounting for the winter time. So it started in spring, and the months were Martius, Aprilis, Maius, Juno, Quintilis, Sextilis, September, October, November, December, which makes perfect sense because September is 7, 8, 9, 10 months. There were a lot of changes actually to the calendar between Romulus and the Roman calendar, beginning of the Roman calendar, and Julius Caesar and the Julian calendar. There was an emperor that introduced Januarius and Februarius, but it was Julius Caesar in about 45 BC that made the major changes. And he turned it from a lunar calendar into a solar calendar and began it with January. Januarius, or we say January. And so we see the addition of 2 months, changes to the days of the month, quite a lot of changes, important changes. And it didn't end there because Augustus tweaked it as well, but we still know it as the Julian calendar. And so beginning in January, we note that Quintilis, from the Roman calendar, the name changed to July, because Julius Caesar would name it after himself. And then Augustus would go on to name Sextilis after himself. So Quintilis became July because it was Julius Caesar's birthday, I think 11th or 12th or 13th. 12th or 13th, I think. They're not sure, around that time. August, it wasn't his birthday. I think September is actually Augustus's birthday, but it was an important month for Augustus. So we mark July as the 5th month. And we also, when it comes to Donald Trump, we mark him as the 5th president since the time of the end. So since Ronald Reagan, we've had Bush Senior, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, and the fifth is Donald Trump. But then he is also, because we've got Biden, he's also the seventh. And prophetically, we understand that the fifth and the seventh are the same. Think of Sardis and Laodicea. So he is the fifth, he is the seventh, which is essentially the same. He will be the seventh. Anyway, so that's Quintilis.
Ndiyo Quintilis.
And that was a piece of information that I left off explaining in the first study. And we mark Julius Caesar as significant because in July, actually, I might just take that back. But there's quite a bit of controversy among historians about who was the first dictator of the Roman Republic. So Julius Caesar stands on the cusp from the old Republican empire and the new imperialism. So some people say, oh, Augustus is the first dictator, but he's really Julius Caesar is on the cusp of that. And he did declare himself a dictator and a dictator for life. So we mark Julius Caesar here. When we looked at his name, we noted that his name is Gaius Julius Caesar, Gaius being his praenomen, his given name. Julius, because he belonged to the Julii tribe, it's his nomen, but Caesar was his cognomen. And he was called that because it showed which tribe he belonged to. And he belonged to the tribe, the family, which particular family of the Julii tribe he belonged to. And he belonged to the family whose ancestor had killed an elephant in the Punic Wars. And so Caesar actually is, I think it's Phoenician, whatever the language is for Punic, but I think it's Phoenician, for elephant. So we can mark elephants there. And when he minted his first coin, he had a picture of an elephant above his name. So we note that in July this year will be the Republican National Convention, and there will be 2,272 pledged delegates that will go to that conference to vote for Donald Trump because he has won the primary. There'll be more that vote for him. They will all vote for him, but they are the ones that are so far pledged. So the history of Caesar and the transition from the old republic to the new dictatorship, imperial dictatorship, is marked with Julius Caesar. From the old republican system to the new autocracy. Many Romans treated him as the first emperor, the founder of the system of one-man rule. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to review is our stories of Daniel. So, if you remember, we looked at the first 3 chapters of Daniel and saw that they illustrated how the everlasting gospel works. So, we'll do that here. Daniel 1 illustrated the first angel's message because Daniel had to fear God and give more than he feared Nebuchadnezzar. He had to give God glory, which he did. He glorified God in his body by not eating of the king's table. And because judgment was coming in 3 days, 10 days and in 3 years. 2 lots of judgments for Daniel. Daniel 2,
Daniel chapter 2,
second angel's message, when we see the image and it's full, as it was, as Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed it. He saw the fall of Babylon, from literal Babylon to spiritual Babylon, in the toes, the image fell. And then Daniel 3,
Daniel chapter 3,
which is Sunday law. Unrighteous decree and a time of trouble such as never was in the fiery furnace being heated 10 times as it was wont to be heated. So these 3 chapters illustrated the first, the work of the everlasting gospel, which is kind of interesting, but it can mean nothing unless you see a second witness. And we see a second witness in the next 3 chapters. So Daniel 4,
tunoona second witness muchapter 3
Daniel tells the king, you better fear God, stop giving glory to yourself, you're going to get judged. Daniel 5, that's the first angel's message. Daniel 5, literal fall of Babylon. Daniel 6, Sunday law, third angel's message. So we see, when we see similarities and we see differences. So the differences that we noted from the two lots of 3 chapters is that, we see this, the first 3 chapters as an illustration of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We see the next 3 chapters as an illustration of the United States of America. So similar to the parable that we see in Acts 27, 2 institutions, we can see that in the stories of Daniel. So we want to compare. If you notice, like in the story of Daniel chapter 4, the king is gone for 7 years, but the kingdom doesn't fall apart. Why? Because the institutions are in place. There's Daniel. It can run without Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel 5, there is no Daniel, and the kingdom falls. Belshazzar's mum's got to say, hang on, I think we better go and get that old fella out there that used to work for us. He'll tell you what's going on. So kingdom falls, no Daniel. But what we want to do is compare Daniel 6 and Daniel 3, because we're interested in Sunday law and the unrighteous decree. And what we noticed when we went through the elections history, the history of voting rights of the United States, is the use of the word suffrage. And suffrage means prayers. Because what are you doing when you are praying? You are asking for somebody to intercede for you, to represent somebody who you're talking to, somebody who represents you and wants to intercede for you. So it's the same as when we vote. Voting is called suffrage, where we're engaging with the government to work on our behalf. So we see suffrage here in Daniel chapter 6. It's similar but different story in Daniel chapter 3. There's similarities and differences. So what is Daniel praying for here? He's praying the prayer of Daniel chapter 9. He's praying for restoration. And we're praying for restoration. The restoration that Daniel was after, the rebuilding of a city and the restoration of a king, is different to the restoration we're praying for. We're praying for the restoration of Eden, but it's restoration nonetheless. We don't want any earthly king. We see that as a problem. But anyway, Daniel chapter 6 is the prayers. So with Daniel chapter 6, with Daniel's predicament, there are a number of options.
nezvazvakatarisa
So
navatanyo
the
pane
unrighteous,
maoptions akawanda
unrighteous
akaripo.
decree is that
Saka,
you had to
decree
pray to the
yeunrighteous
king,
yaiva yekuti
Darius,
waifana kunamata kuna
or you
mambo
can petition the king,
Darius,
or
kana
you could
kuti
petition your God.
waigona
But if you
kukumbira
petitioned your
kuna
God,
mambo
you'd get
kana
thrown
kuti
in the
waikumbira
lion's
kuna
den.
Mwari, ukakumbira kuna Mwari
So
wako
was there any other
waizoiswa
option?
kulions
And yes,
den.
there is.
Saka
You
kwaiva
could
neimwe
not
option
petition
here,
at all.
hongu
Just
yaivapo,
don't ask the king for
waigona
anything, and don't
kusatoita
ask your God for
petition,
anything. Just
ungoregedza
stay
kukumbira
home,
mambo,
stay home,
ungoregedza
close
kukumbira
your
Mwari,
curtains.
ungogara
And
kumba
why
kwako
that
uvhara
is
maketeni yako.
significant is because when we look
Izvi
at
zviri
the
significant
election this year, is
inyaya
that
yekuti
that kind of
pakutarisa
attitude,
election nhasi,
it's what is called
attitude
disengaged
iyoyo
voters,
ndo inonzi
are going to have a
ma-disengaged
huge
voters.
effect on the
Vachava
election results.
neeffect yakakura
So there are
pamaresults
some really
ema-elections.
interesting studies that have been happening
Saka
since
pane ma-studies ari
2022,
interesting anga ari
probably
kuitika
earlier, that they've been
pa-2022
looking at the
pamwe
role of
earlier, asi anga
disengaged
ari
voters.
kutarisa
So I want to share a little
role
bit of
yema-disengaged
information
voters.
about that.
Saka ndoda kusheya zvishoma nezveizvozvo.
First of all, I'll just take you to a page that explains, gives some reasons why people in the US don't vote.
Mhaka vanhu vekuamerica vasingavhoti.
But here's an interesting article, 5 reasons people in the US don't vote. A list of the known causes. So there are many Americans that want to vote but can't. So why can't they? Because in some states, if you've had a conviction, if you've been a convicted felon, you are taken off the voter rolls. Sometimes it's very hard for people to get voter IDs because you've got to have a government-issued photo ID, so that limits you. And there are countries. They're not countries, sorry. There are US territories. Guam, the Virgin Islands, the North Mariana Islands, American Samoa, Puerto Rico. They aren't allowed to vote in general elections, even though the results of that election influence their lives. So there are hundreds of thousands of non-voters that would vote if they could, but they can't. Then it explains why age, gender, education, socio-economic status, and race impact whether you vote or not. Poverty is a major factor there, as why people tend not to vote. Election day held on a Tuesday, which is the most ridiculous thing. The reason it's on a Tuesday is because way back in the day, that's when the farmers would take their produce into town. It was market day, so it's always been held on a Tuesday. And of course, if you're working, you don't get paid to take time off to go to the election. So it makes it hard on people. So people don't vote because they can't afford to lose their pay. People don't vote because there's only 2 parties and they don't feel that any of them represent them. But it's this one here that I'd like us to really have a think about. Citizens are less likely to vote if they don't think their ballot matters. As many as 15% of registered voters reported that they didn't vote in the 2016 presidential election because they didn't believe their vote would make a difference, according to Census Bureau data. A different Pew Research Center survey found that half of the participants didn't bother to research the election because they didn't think their vote impacted the government, even though voting is one of the few ways for citizens to push forward policies they support.
Government, even though
so I think that's an important thing to take into account, because if we look at the external, it can also mirror what's happening internally. So people don't vote because they don't feel that it really matters that they participate. And that same thing can happen internally. Is your ballot, your vote, your voice actually does matter. So everybody's participation actually matters. And so as in the external, so in the internal. I think that's a takeaway point that we can make from that. But it's these non-voters, and there are also disengaged voters. So we mark 1989 as the introduction of the World Wide Web. And information is going to boom that the world has never had access to before. Now, back in the day, when I was growing up, I had the choice of 2 television channels. If we had money to buy an aerial, and my parents thought that aerials could make their home look better because they actually thought aerials were ugly, so we weren't allowed to have an aerial on our house. I don't think they could afford one anyway, but that was their excuse. We could have had 3 channels, but we only had 2. One was the ABC, which is our national broadcaster, and the other one was Channel 7. And so when you came home, there was children programming. You got to watch that. And if you were eating tea, you sat through the news while you ate tea or ate your dinner. Then after dinner, there would be a current affairs. And then you got to the show you wanted to watch. You got to your sitcom or whatever the main feature of the night was. But most people had to sit through the news. If you received a newspaper and you were only interested in the sports section, you would at least see the front page of a newspaper before you got to the, even if you didn't read it, you saw it before you got to the back page. Information has grown phenomenally since then, and now people have so much choice of television, cable, internet, that you can be totally disengaged from politics. And so I find relatives of mine today can put the television on tonight and at night and totally avoid the news. Can just switch or just go to a channel that is on, just on anything that they particularly like. So people can just engage in sports news or reality television, anything that they prefer, and totally disengage from politics. But what these studies are finding is that when you do that, you are more likely to find yourself on the wrong side and not on the right side of the politics. So, I mean wrong as opposed to right, not right and left. So what happens is that even, for example, if you're just watching reality television, you're living in a fantasy world. So it might be home improvements. And you're watching homes getting built and getting landscaped or any home improvement, and it will be something that is not attainable for you. So when it comes to elections, what is going to be the main driver of your thoughts for those elections? It's going to be affordability, inflation, those issues. It's not going to be the threat of democracy. So what they're finding is when we think of polarization within politics, we've been inclined to think of left and right, which is true. But within the left and within the right, they have their own disengaged voters, people that are not political junkies. So this movement as a whole is a political junkie. We live for current events and historical events and what's going to happen tomorrow. But we are a minority. And political junkies across the world are a minority, people that really follow politics intently. The majority of people are those that don't engage. But when you don't engage, you actually get funneled down the wrong way. You might just want to watch sports, listen to sports channels, watch, listen. It walks you down. So if you're in the United States and you're just watching sports channels, there's like an ambient atmosphere that is anti-Biden. It's just there. It's not in your face, but it's there, and it leads, because what they're finding is non-engaged voters do vote. So you've got a lot of people that don't vote,
Saka
And
une
then
vanhu
you've got
vakawanda
a mass of
vasingavhoti
people that are disengaged but still
kwozoita
vote.
vanhu vakawanda vari
We
disengaged
have that
asi
in Australia,
vanongovhota zvakadaro.
in that we have
Izvi tinazvo kuaustralia.
compulsory voting, and the
Tine
majority of
kuvhota kuri
Australians are
compulsory.
disengaged.
Ruzhinji
And so when it
rweaustralia
comes to our
vari
elections, our
disengaged.
politicians have to
Saka
spend that
pazvinouya
time just not
kumaelections
upsetting anybody.
mapoliticians edu vanofanira
Whereas
kuspenda
American
time iyoyo
politics tends to be more
vasingatsamwise munhu.
toxic because they've got
Apo
to get people to
politics
the polls.
dzekuamerica dzine dziri
And so
toxic.
it's very,
Vanotoita kuti vanhu vauye
their
kumapolls. Saka
campaigning is more divisive than ours
kukambena kwavo kuri
because of
divisive
the
zvakanyanya
different situation.
nenyaya
So being
yemasituation
disengaged is
akasiyana-siyana.
a very dangerous
Saka kuve
position.
disengaged
So if we think of
iposition iri dangerous.
Daniel chapter 6,
Tikafunga nezva
so you
Daniel
can
chapter
pray
6 unogona kunamata
to Darius.
kuna
That's
Darius.
the wrong decision. You can
Ingava
pray
decision isiri iyo. Unogona
to
kunamata
God,
kuna Mwari
or you can not pray.
kana kuti unogona kusarudza kusanamata zvachose.
That's also a wrong decision. So our engagement within the movement, if we mirror that as well, is also quite telling.
Itamira zvakare inotiudza zvakawanda.
The other thing to note there is the role of influencers, because the movement has said a fair bit on influencers before, and influencers also, even if they don't even talk about politics, they're walking you down a particular road. And this is just a quote from a Vox article in May 28, 2024. It is possible that the declining influence of mainstream news organisations is rendering the electorate increasingly distrustful. The past 4 years have witnessed a proliferation of podcasts and alternative media gurus who portray the government, medical authorities and conventional journalistic outlets as hopelessly corrupt. As more voters get their information from such influencers, it's plausible that political distrust would rise. But among those who primarily get their news from social media, the president leads the third-party candidate by just 2 percentage points. So just let me share another article. So where people get their news consumption from. And this is an NBC. NBC, its polling is done by Project 538. I think that's what it's called. And it's a very good polling system. But this is presidential preference, how it varies by news consumption. So those that don't follow political news, 53%, are more likely to vote for Trump than Biden. Those that get their news from YouTube or Google, you can see the red, Trump over Biden. Cable news, red over Biden. Social media, red over the blue. Then as we come down, and we look at digital websites, national network news, like our APC, newspapers, then it's the blue really outweighs the red there. Yeah, Trump fares best with those who don't follow political news.
Anonyanya kuvoterwa neavo vasingateedzeri political news.
Is there anything else? So yeah, the way things are run at the moment, it's possible to be totally immersed in news and possible to be totally disengaged from news. But yes, being disengaged is a dangerous thing. And the other thing that they're finding is, if you within the Democrats, you've got people
mukati
that are
memademocrats
really engaged in politics, and they're not, I'm not saying far left.
engaged
We're not talking
zvakanyanya
far left or
politics.
centrist.
Handisi kuti far
We're
left,
talking a
hatisi
whole
kutaura
different
nezve far
genre.
left
So
kana kuti
Democrats
macentrist.
that are engaged in
Kutaura vanhu
politics,
vakatosiyana.
those that are disengaged.
Mademocrats vari engaged
The ones that are
politics,
disengaged
koita vamwe vasiri
are more likely
disengaged.
to think of
vari
inflation
disengaged
and affordability as
vanowanzofunga nezveinflation,
things that they're
kudhura
worried about with
kwezvinhu,
the election. Those that are
sezvinhu
engaged are
zvavanenge
concerned about the threats to
vachifunga nezvazvo
democracy.
mumaelections.
And
Avo
the
vari
gap, what they're
engaged
showing is the
vanofunga
gap
nemathreats
between
edemocracy. Zvavari kuratidza ndezvekuti
engaged
gap
Democrats
riripo
and
pakati
disengaged Democrats is
pemademocrats vari
greater
engaged nevari
than the
disengaged.
gap between
Rakakura
disengaged Democrats
kupfuura
and
gap
disengaged
riri pakati
Republicans.
pemademocrats vari
They're much
disengaged
closer together.
nemarepublicans
And
vari
they're the people
disengaged.
that are going to determine the
Zvakakuedza
outcome of the
ndo vanhu
election because they are in the majority.
vachatiratidza outcome yemaelection nekuti
And
ndo
so
vari
the
mumajority.
political parties are really, well, at least the Democrats are really trying to get
Mademocrats vari kuzama
engage the disengaged. The Republicans
kuti
don't even have
vari
to worry about it
disengaged
because
vave
they're in their
engaged.
favor anyway.
Marepublicans havatomboiti wari nezvinhu izvozvo
So the last thing I want to,
saka chinhu
second last thing actually, that I want to touch on is May 30.
chandoda kubata pachiri.
So what happened on May 30?
Chii chakaitika zuva May 30?
May 30, there was an earthquake that emanated from a lower Manhattan courtroom. Thursday evening, May 30. Donald Trump became the first former US president to be convicted of felony crimes. The former President Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to keep hush money payments out of the public eye before the 2016 election. The New York prosecution brought by Alvin Bragg was tried before a jury in Juan Merchan's court. Despite an aggressive defense strategy, multiple violations of a gag order, overt abuse leveled at witnesses, and the looming threat of a glowering Donald Trump staring you down, the jurors unanimously found Trump guilty on every count. So he's been found guilty on 34 counts of business fraud. Why is that important? Well, first of all, why is it a felony? So the words misdemeanor and felony, we don't use those terms here. So a misdemeanor is a less serious crime and a felony is a more serious crime. Here we call them indictable offences and summary offences. So a summary offence in Australia is the same as a misdemeanor. It's a less serious crime. And an indictable offence here is the same as a felony. So business fraud,
business fraud,
falsifying business records. So falsifying business records would normally be seen as a misdemeanor. But why has he been convicted why has it been charged as a felony? Because that misdemeanor was used to cover up another crime. So if you falsify business records, which is a misdemeanor, to cover up another crime, then it becomes a felony. And what was that other crime? That other crime was election fraud. So this case, this whole hush money trial is essentially about election fraud. So what the jurors had to do, they had to say to themselves, did Donald Trump, beyond a reasonable doubt, cause business documents to be falsified and, in order to conceal another crime? In order to conceal a New York election law, which is to use unlawful means to promote a candidate in an election. So there's a New York election law. You are not to use unlawful means to promote a candidate in an election. So that's why it became such a serious charge, a felony. Okay, and there were 3 ways that he falsified those
pane
documents.
nzira nhatu dzaakaita kuti madocuments aya ave enhema.
You can look them up for yourselves, but the jurors didn't have to
Unogona
be unanimous in their
kuzvitarisira.
decision on how he did that. There were
Vaitonga mhosva
multiple ways
havana kubatana
that
havo
he falsified
pane
those documents.
muitiro wavaizviita. Pane nzira dzakawanda dzaakaita kuti madocuments aya ave enhema.
So why is that important?
Nemhaka yei zvakakosha.
Was it such a bad thing that he slept with a porn star? Well, that's a moral issue.
Chachiri chinhu chakashata here kuti akarara
That he
nemunhu
hushed it up, that he paid the porn star money to keep it
kuti
quiet.
akabva amunyararidza
So,
porn star
yeah, not a good thing to do.
anyarare.
But what made it so impactful is that whether it was right or wrong, that was for the public to decide. If that information had have got out there, then the public would have used that information to make their decision at the election. And the public were never allowed to make that decision because it was kept from them. So Donald Trump had already got himself into trouble with the Hollywood tapes, where he said that he could just grab any woman by the genitals, which he had been doing. He was so well known amongst New York circles for his abuse of women. It's just prolific, so it was certainly no secret amongst the New Yorkers. So that information had already been surfaced through the Hollywood Access tapes. And if this information had have came out about the hush money to the porn star, that would have really affected not only the election results, but his standing within the Republican Party. He didn't have the backing back then that he has today. So covering up that information affected the 2016 election. So we can think there's major things that kept Hillary Clinton from office in 2016. We know the Russians are involved, disinformation, collusion.
2016 election
Is part of our midnight crime message. What has also surfaced lately is the work of WikiLeaks and how Julian Assange turned on Hillary Clinton and had a major effect. That's why a lot of the left stopped backing him as well. His release of information that hurt Hillary Clinton. And now we also know that this hush money had well, we'll never know because the people never got to use that information to decide their vote. So May 30 was a huge event. He is not technically a convicted felon until he's sentenced, and he'll be sentenced on July 11th. So Trump did what he always does. He used his money and influence, because he's rich and well connected, to hide the truth from the American people. Was it a big deal? That was for the voters to decide. And he took that choice away from them. So we have election interference as a so some people, if you're not following that court case, it was hard to know what it was really all about. But it is at its essence about election interference, not about Donald Trump's morality, even though that wasn't what was on trial.
Election interference, kwete morality ya Trump. Sizvo zvaiva patrial.
So the last thing I'd like to share in closing, just to add on to the previous studies, is last year we were introduced to the book The Demon Lover by Robin Morgan on the sexuality or on the roots of terrorism, depending on what edition you had, the sexuality or the roots of terrorism. And here, Robin Morgan, I'll just read from the cover.
Robin Morgan, cover.
She was establishing the connection between terrorism and sexuality. How can we understand the sexual charisma that violence exudes? She confronts and explores terrorism by the left and right, whether revolutionary or state-sanctioned, and links it all back to patriarchy. So I'm not going to take the time to review what we shared, but I just wanted to take you to the end of her book, where she gives a number of strategies to counterattack the patriarchal terrorism. The first strategy that she gives, she says, talking about woman, she looks at the world, she thinks, I have no idea what to do to change all this. But those in power don't know what they're doing either. So she's very honest. I don't know how to change any of this, but does anybody? So she's going to suggest a couple of strategies. The first strategy, women, demand that all girls be taught self-defense in required courses at the primary school level. She knows this demand is consistent with genuine anti-violence, because if there are no prey, there can be no predator. And because such forms as judo and aikido wittily turn the attacker's own strength against himself. So strategy number one is self-defense. And not just any self-defense, but there are, she recommends those in particular. But what's the second strategy? She remembers that there are places in the world where women still cannot vote. So she uses her ballot as a potentially radical lever. So I'll leave it there. But the number one, so the two strategies that she lists are self-defense and voting. Voting matters. Every vote counts. Every person's individual participation matters. And it's easy to think that you can get lost in all that and that you don't matter and you can just drift along and follow the tide. But that never works. It's not healthy. It's not safe. So personal participation internally is required. So that is a review of the two presentations that were uploaded a couple of weeks ago, and with just adding the information that was left out. And so I'd also like to share a succinct, but I thought very good summary of that presentation that was shared with me by a member from Kenya. They wrote, when we mark 2014, 2019 and 2021 as Shadow Sunday laws or developments for the Sunday law, and we have to thread events, as I demonstrated, the three-way marks are all about the Republican Party. 2014, the purging of Republican Party of moderates. 2019, the opportunity for Republicans to impeach Trump, but they failed. 2021, the second opportunity for Republicans to impeach Trump for January 6th insurrections, but they didn't. And then the Republican convention that will crown him they will crown him even though he's a convicted felon, and that will be July of 2024. So I thought the way that person just threaded from 2014, 2019, 2021 to 2024 was very nicely done. And so let's close with prayer. Dear God in heaven, there is so much happening around us at the moment, and it can be overwhelming, but we are not discouraged. We don't mind being counted amongst the minority, that see truth
hatina
in
basa
watching
nekuverenga
current events
minority
and understanding history.
vanoona chokwadi
We just ask
mukuona
that you would
macurrent
continue
events
to
mukunzwisisa nhoroondo.
help us to sharpen our tools
kuti murambe
so that we may
muchienderera mberi
understand these events
kutibetsera
correctly and come
kushapena
away with the
matools
right
edu
conclusions.
tigonzwisisa zvinhu izvi zviri
So,
correct
Lord,
nekuzova
lead and guide us
nemaconclusions ari
is our
right.
prayer in
Mwari
Jesus' name.
titungamirire.
Amen.
Iyi ndo munamato wedu muzita raJesu. Amen.